Hello, today I will share with you 6 stories about 6 major disasters caused by humans. And the level of damage from each disaster will become increasingly horrific if you watch the entire video. First up is the Mesa Redonda disaster. This disaster happened in a large city in Peru called Lima. This city has a very large commercial center area known as Mesa Redonda. This commercial hub had many stalls selling all sorts of things, much like a modern shopping mall. And no one could have imagined that one day, a horrific disaster would strike this very place. It was on December 29, 2001. As you can see, this date was very close to the end of the year, in the lead up to New Year's, so many fireworks were being sold that day. At the shops, they began to display all kinds of fireworks for sale. And it wasn't just one shop, many other shops were also selling fireworks. The day was very busy, and everything was proceeding normally until an incident occurred. At one of the firework stalls, the owner took out a firework to set it off for everyone to see. This firework exploded quite loudly, emitting a lot of sparks. Nearby, there was a crate of fireworks, and the sparks from the firework that had just been lit fell into this crate, causing it to catch fire. And when that crate of fireworks ignited, it caused other nearby crates to catch fire as well, and eventually, the entire store was engulfed in flames. And when one store caught fire, all the nearby stores also caught fire because they were all selling fireworks, creating a sea of flames. After the incident occurred, the commercial center that day was like hell. Fire trucks and firefighters were quickly dispatched to extinguish the blaze immediately. Fortunately, they managed to put out the fire that same night. But after the fire was extinguished, the damage it caused was horrific. Many buildings were severely devastated. And the worst part of that day was that this fire caused 291 deaths and left at least 134 others injured. This is considered one of the worst fireworks-related fires in history. The second disaster is the Mecca Tunnel disaster. To talk about this disaster, I'll give a brief overview of Islam. Every year, Muslims undertake a pilgrimage called the Hajj to the city of Mecca in Saudi Arabia. This is a massive pilgrimage that every Muslim must perform at least once in their lifetime. During the Hajj, people perform several rituals, such as circling the Kaaba building 7 times, going to Mount Arafat to pray, and the stoning of the devil ritual, among others. And a tragedy occurred during this pilgrimage. It was in 1990, specifically on July 3rd. While people were participating in the pilgrimage, they had to pass through a tunnel. Inside and at the exit of the tunnel, there were a great many people. On that day, an incident occurred that triggered the disaster. Above the tunnel, there was a walkway for other pilgrims, and unfortunately, some people fell from this walkway into the crowd below. At that moment, the crowd at the tunnel's exit descended into chaos. Simultaneously, another event happened. Some people said that the power in the tunnel went out that day. As a result, everyone inside and outside the tunnel panicked. People began to push and shove each other to move, causing some to stumble, fall, and be trampled. To summarize, that day, 7 people fell at the exit, and the power went out inside the tunnel. The temperature that day was around 44 degrees Celsius, which is extremely hot. These 3 factors combined to cause a tragedy, a massive stampede right there in the tunnel. It led to the deaths of 1,426 people who were trampled. The third disaster is the one in Halifax. This disaster occurred at the port of Halifax in Canada. It was in 1917, specifically on December 6. On that day, people living near the coast heard a massive explosion. The explosion was so large that it destroyed nearly all the nearby buildings. Artillery and soldiers were summoned to prepare for battle. They thought someone had bombed the city, but that wasn't the case. Everything started with 2 ships. The first ship was named the Imo, a Norwegian vessel. The second ship was the Mont Blanc, a French vessel. These 2 ships might look like warships, but they were actually just cargo ships. That day, the 2 ships were sailing on the sea and happened to encounter each other. The captains of both ships blew their whistles to signal an impending collision, but they couldn't avoid it in time, and a collision occurred. This could be considered a minor collision, but it was the start of a massive disaster. After the collision, the impact created a small spark that set the Mont Blanc on fire. The reason the Mont Blanc caught fire so easily was because it was carrying some highly flammable goods, and on that day, it was also carrying a very dangerous type of cargo, a huge amount of explosives. So, after burning for a while, the ship exploded. And since the ship was near the shore, people at the port that day witnessed an explosion right on the sea. This explosion was enormous. It destroyed nearly every building near the port. The blast created a wave that pushed the IMO right up against the shore. This is a picture of the smoke column created by that explosion. It may look small, but in reality, it is extremely large. Here is an image illustrating the extent of the devastation caused by the explosion. The closer to the center of the explosion, the more horrific the damage it inflicts. This explosion caused 1,782 deaths and injured 9,000 people. It was the largest man-made non-nuclear explosion in history. The fourth disaster was one that unfolded silently, and people did not realize its danger. It was in 1952, specifically around December. The weather in London at that time was very cold, and being so cold, people started heating their homes more. At that time, people primarily used coal for heating. Each house had a coal-fired stove. They would put coal in it and burn it for warmth. At that time, every household burned a lot of coal because it was so cold, so the coal smoke emissions were also very high. The factories also used a lot of coal, so the emissions from the factories were also very high. And in London at that time, there was notably a lot of fog. To summarize, people used a lot of coal for heating, so coal smoke emissions were high. Factories also used a lot of coal, and their emissions were also high, combined with the fog. These three things together created a layer of smog in London known as the Great Smog of London. At that time, London's air was covered by a layer of yellow, highly polluted smog. This smog was so dense that for some people who went outside, their visibility was only about 1 meter, meaning they couldn't see anything farther than 1 meter away. This smog event began on December 5th and lasted until December 9th, when the smog finally dissipated. Although it only lasted for 5 days, this smog caused the deaths of approximately 4,000 people. Later statistics suggest the number could be as high as 10,000, with another 100,000 people falling ill, all of them suffering from respiratory tract infections. The fifth disaster is the Chernobyl power plant disaster. This disaster occurred at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, in the city of Pripyat, Ukraine. Here's how the story goes. It was in 1986, and inside the Chernobyl plant, there was something called a nuclear reactor. This nuclear reactor is always hot, so it constantly needs to be cooled by water. To continuously pump water into the reactor, an electric-powered water pump system is required. Therefore, if the power goes out, it's impossible to pump water into the reactor. The problem posed here was how to pump water into the reactor in the event of a power outage. The engineers then came up with a solution. From what I've read, I'll explain it to you as I understand it. When the nuclear reactor operates, it's very hot, and its heat is used to spin a steam turbine. When this turbine spins, it generates electricity, and they would use this electricity to run the water pump system to pump water back into the reactor in case of a power outage. After figuring out the method, the engineers began the experiment. On one fateful day, people living near the plant heard a loud explosion that damaged a part of the plant structure. A moment later, they heard another explosion, and this time it was even bigger. The first explosion was a steam explosion. Simply put, the steam pressure was too high and it blew the lid off the nuclear reactor. The second explosion occurred inside the reactor itself. Many experts believe this was actually a hydrogen gas explosion. After the explosion, 2 engineers were killed instantly, and 237 other workers were injured. Among these 237 people, 134 suffered from acute radiation sickness, meaning they were exposed to a very high dose of radiation in a short period. Consequently, among these 134 people, 54 later died. Including the 2 initial engineers and 1 other worker who died, the official immediate death toll is 56 people. However, the actual death toll is estimated to be around 200,000 people as of 2004. This is because when the plant exploded, it released a massive amount of radioactive dust into the environment. When people are exposed to these radioactive particles, after a few months or a few years, they can develop cancer, which leads to death. The city of Pripyat became a ghost town. This is considered the most damaging and costly nuclear disaster in history. The sixth disaster took place in Japan. Chances are you've heard of this event before, so I'll just summarize what happened at that time. It was in 1945, during World War II, when many countries were at war, including the United States against Japan. The US was with the Allies, while Japan was with the Axis powers. At that point, the US determined that its losses were too great, so they needed to find a way to end the war, but Japan was unwilling to stop. So, the US initiated a project called the Manhattan Project, which was a research and development project for nuclear weapons. The US felt this was the most opportune time to use nuclear weapons to force Japan's surrender. After that, the US chose its first bombing target in Japan, the city of Hiroshima, because it had many military bases and important industrial areas. In Hiroshima, on August 6, 1945, the US flew a plane and dropped a bomb right on the city. When the bomb was about 580 meters above the ground, it detonated, creating an incredibly bright flash of light followed by a massive explosion that formed a mushroom-shaped fireball, destroying everything within a 1.6-kilometer radius. The bomb the US used that day was named Little Boy, and it killed 80,000 people instantly. The final death toll is 140,000, because many people suffered from radiation from the nuclear blast and later died of cancer. After dropping the first bomb, the US demanded Japan surrender, but Japan showed no signs of surrendering. So, 3 days later, the US chose another target, Nagasaki, and decided to drop another bomb there. In Nagasaki, on August 9, 1945, the US dropped the second bomb. When this bomb was 503 meters above the ground, it detonated, and this time the explosion was much larger than the previous one, also destroying everything within a 1.6-kilometer radius. This second bomb was named Fat Man. This bomb was much more powerful than Little Boy, but the number of casualties was lower. The number of direct fatalities was between 22,000 and 75,000, and the final total death toll is about 80,000 people. A few days after the two bombs were dropped, Japan announced its surrender. Let me tell you something else rather scary from that time. Before the US developed the atomic bomb, a group in Germany had also begun researching nuclear weapons in a project during World War II. This German project failed. Germany was unable to create a nuclear weapon. Because if Germany had been able to create a nuclear weapon at that time, I can't even imagine where the world would have ended up. And there you have it, 6 disasters caused by humankind. Of course, there are many other disasters. If people like this video, I'll make more parts in the future. For now, goodbye.